I've been doing gardening for a couple of years now. I actually started with my grandma when I was younger. I used to spend the summers at her house, and she taught me. She had these massive raised beds and like a cut flower garden, and so she taught me all about tomatoes, cucumbers, green beans, everything you could imagine. So that was something that kind of how I got my basis of a lot of my learning. Over the past couple of years, I've been doing more independently with my mom. At my old house, we had maybe 9 raised beds, I believe it was. So we grew a lot of, I like to do a lot of container gardening. I actually use 5-gallon buckets. I found that's given me, I found it's given me a lot of success. Because you can kind of control a lot of the factors that go into your plants. And even if I like to start really, really early in the season, and I found that works really well because I can bring them inside because it's very cold out. But some of the stuff I wanted to cover, some of the seeds that are best to start when. I did make this presentation for the first workshop, which was in January, but all the seeds for that season or that month, you can still plant them now, of course. You can plant them anytime you want. Some of the supplies that you are going to need, I do have a little display here, so I can pass some things around if you would like. Soil types and how to avoid different problems, pest prevention, how to transplant, and some troubleshooting problems. But my experience, this was one of the flowers that my grandma grew. I took this picture a few years ago. Unfortunately, I don't have super great photos. I switched phones and I lost a lot of my photos, unfortunately. So this is from really, really early in the season. This was my first year growing at my old house. You can see here I do a lot of container gardening. So these are actually called green stalks. It's a type of vertical planting that rotates, and it's like self-watering. So you just put it in on the top and it funnels right through. So it's pretty cool. We did we did bush beans and strawberries in those, which worked really, really well. And then we also grew our peas and beans along the fence here because we try to make the most space out of our gardening. But unfortunately, it's not a super great picture that shows. This picture just shows, hello. This picture just shows a little bit more of our container gardening. This is actually a pumpkin that's growing. I really, really like to take control of as much space that I have, and that includes vertical space. And then I just have a little picture, it's not super great quality, but of the strawberries that we planted in one of our lower raised beds. They did really, really well. All right, and so, of course, like I said before, the late January plants, you can still plant them now. Honestly, with how cold it's been, and the woodchuck did say that winter's going to be a little longer this year, so they honestly would probably be better now, even then. But you can do eggplants, peppers, loofahs, and broccoli. Loofahs, I actually just started mine maybe 2 weeks ago. They're putting out their second set of leaves. They're a type of squash, kind of looking gourd, and a lot of people use them for shower sponges. So they're really cool, and there's something kind of different that you can grow. And then right now, I would do tomatoes, greens, peas and beans, and your root vegetables. Root veggies are best if you do them by true seed. I started a couple different types of onions, and you just kind of do them in a little pot and divide them up later on. Oh yeah. Lighting is really, really important. Because some people think that you can just pop your seeds by a windowsill and they're going to do really great, but a lot of the time it's not as bright as the sun would be, and your plants are going to get really tall. They're going to kind of grow because they don't have that above light like they would have from the sun, or above grow light, so they'll kind of grow to the side, and a lot of the time they can actually flop over and become leggy, and they won't be as strong. And if they're leggy, they aren't going to be able to support the fruit growth, say like tomatoes or something, where they're going to have things that are this big and they're not going to be able to support that. I really like fluorescent lighting. It's a lot cheaper. They come in a lot of different sizes. So I've seen them in like 2-foot bulbs up to like 4 and 6-foot bulbs. So they're really, really nice for customizing to your space, which I really, really like about them. There's different fixtures that you can put 1 bulb in, and I've had one that you can put up to 8 bulbs in to really get that intensity of light, and you can mount them onto the ceiling using the chains. I've done PVC with little hooks in the ceiling before, and I found that worked really, really well. Unfortunately, over time, those bulbs do lose some of their power, and it can be a little hard to tell because your seedlings will just kind of become a little leggier because they don't really lose some of that brightness. So you do have to change the bulbs periodically and kind of keep up on that. T5s, this one, we sell these ones in store. They work really well. My manager, Anne, loves these. They're really, really similar to the fluorescent lighting, but they're a lot stronger. And another great thing about them is they don't get as hot as some other bulbs, so you don't have to worry about them burning your plants as much. But they are a little more expensive because they are stronger than a lot of T5s, and they also have to be replaced periodically. You just kind of have to keep up on it because it can be hard to tell when it's time. My personal favorite are LEDs. This is what I'm using this year. They're technically aquarium lights that I'm using. I'm very flexible. I do something called chaos gardening, which doesn't necessarily follow the normal guidelines for gardening or by the book. But I found they work really, really well for my aquariums. They were working great. My plants have a lot of strong growth. None of them are leggy. The sets of seed leaves, I've got maybe 4 sets of leaves in this big of a space. They're really great. They provide full spectrum lighting. They don't get hot, which is one of my favorite things about them because I've definitely burned some seeds before, and then your soil dries out really quickly if they get warm. So that's my personal favorite, and they're also pretty energy efficient. And you can also have them in a lot of different colors, which is really nice, but they can be a lot more expensive up front because gotten a lot more popular over the years. But another thing about the LEDs is they come in a lot of shapes. Some of them come on little stands with little arms, so you can do some taller plants. You can also reuse them for your house plants in case you don't want to have to pack them away. You can kind of use them all year. They also don't lose a lot of that efficiency with the lighting, which is really, really great about them. But when you're looking for your lights, a lot of the time on the back of the package, there'll be a little light spectrum. It kind of looks like a rainbow graph. So you're going to want to see in the red and the blue, you're going to see it spiked because that's the wavelength that you're looking for because that's going to have optimal plant growth. But to use the grow lights, you just mount them 10 to 14 inches above your seedlings. The LEDs and the fluorescent do need to be a little closer just because they're a little less strong than the T5s. And it's also better to have them a little further away than too close. I personally keep them on for 8 to 10 hours a day. Right now, the plants that I have growing, I actually have them on for 12 to 24 hours just because I'm trying to get as much growth as I can before I plant them outside because I want almost full-size plants by the time they're going outside. And it's also really important. You can make little fixtures to put underneath your seedlings. It could be something even like taking another one of the little trays that's underneath and just flipping it over and putting another tray on it. Just something to give it a little boost so it's a little closer to your lighting because, again, you really don't want leggy seedlings because it's just not going to have the best quality of life for your plants and you're not going to have the most vegetables and fruits, unfortunately. I've also done it that you can take a shelf out. I got just a cheap Home Depot shelf actually. It's like PVC and plastic, and you can just pop out the little shelves and put the connectors back in. So when they get a little taller, you can increase the space between it. And pot sizes are actually really, really important because a lot of the time, if you have too small of a pot, your roots are going to become root bound, which they're not going to be able to take up nutrients. They're going to be taking up way too much water. And you'll find that a lot of that leaf and actual plant growth is going to be stunted, and unfortunately your plants might perish from it. And if you have too big of a pot size, too much moisture is going to be held to those roots, and you'll actually get something called root rot because they're not able to take up the oxygen that's in the soil, and they will turn all slimy and mushy and gross. But one of my favorites to start your seedlings is the greenhouse kit because it's really important to have a humidity dome. I found it's the most simple for beginners especially because you just soak the little pods, that's these guys here. You just soak the little pods, they expand to about 5 times their size, and they're really simple because they have the hole in them already. You just take a little chopstick, put your seed in there. The only thing about those is to be really careful once you up pot because there's such a little peat. There's such a little peat thing that you're gonna have to repot pretty soon, but the great thing about them is you can see the roots that, because they'll start growing out of the sides of it. You just have to be careful because you have to take the little skin off. That's something a lot of people don't know when they use these, because it can inhibit their root growth. So your plant won't be able to reach its full size, and a lot of times it gets choked out. But they're really great because you can choose what kind of fertilizer you want to use, because peat moss doesn't have a lot of nutrients to it already. So you can pick what kind of fertilizers you use. I personally use either the Neptune, it's like a fish waste fertilizer, or I also use Box Farm as well. So that's the little greenhouse kits there with the little pots, and you can see how much it expands, because this is the little compressed peat, and then this is the big guy right there. All right. Seedling trays are really, really great, especially if you're trying to customize the type of soil that you use. A lot of people swear by one soil, so using peat, you're kind of stuck with one thing. I personally use Box Farm. I found that one's the best. It's a mixture of peat, soil, and perlite. But these are my favorites so far. Recently, I meant to bring it in. I actually just got, which I didn't put in my little slideshow. It's a plug maker, so it's a little contraption that has, it's almost like, you know those Spritz cookies where they you plop them out? It's very similar to that, but with soil. So you punch it out, and they make little compressed blocks of whatever soil you want to use. And that way you don't have to worry about, sometimes these containers can rip open, and when you're transplanting, and it can rip out the roots. But using that little compressing thing, it's something that I'm going to be experimenting with this year. It completely eliminates that. It's almost just like a little plug that you can throw directly into your new pot.
What's it called again?
I'm totally blanking. It's like a little compression. I meant to bring it in to show you, but I totally forgot. I left the house at 6 o'clock this morning.
A baby post holder.
It's like a stainless steel. It's maybe this big. It's got like almost looks like a cork remover for like a wine bottle. But it makes just like little cubes, and it's something really interesting that a lot of people don't know about. They actually use them in a lot of bigger farms, which is really fascinating to me.
So once you make that, do you put it in like a container?
Yeah, so what I'm using is, it's basically this, but without the plugs.
Oh, okay.
That way they can stand up in there, and they all are together.
Very cool.
But that's something that I'm going to be experimenting with this year, so definitely let you guys know how that goes. But it's something that a lot of commercial farms use, so I'm trying to kind of up my garden game a little bit. You can also use the compostable seed trays. We had these for our last workshop. I really like these. You just have to make sure that you kind of split open the bottom when you're transplanting, because they don't compost as quickly as you might expect. So you need to make sure that you split open the bottom. It's really easy if you do it right after you water them. But you just need to make sure you do that, or else your roots aren't going to grow to their full potential. Individual nursery pots are, I would say they're a must-have, especially if you're growing so early in the season, because they come in pretty much every size. They usually size up by 1/2 inch to 1 inch. But they're really great because once your plants get bigger, you're going to need as much root space as possible. And then it's great because you can actually put, once you start getting into bigger pot sizes, you can put powdered fertilizer underneath the pot, or underneath the seedling, and it just gives you a lot more room for having a lot more growth. And then something really important is a lot of pots are going to need drainage holes. If you don't have drainage holes, those, like I said before, those roots are just going to suffocate in all of that water, and they're not going to be able to take oxygen up into them, and you're just going to have a soggy mess. Your leaves are going to fall off, and your plant's just going to rot from the bottom up. And drip trays are really important as well. Most of them that I would recommend come with a little lid for germination. That way you can keep that humidity up, but they protect your counters. I like to bottom water my seedlings because it keeps the soil from becoming hydrophobic. A lot of the time you'll notice if you water, it immediately comes out the bottom. It's because the water is going around the sides of the pot and straight out the holes. None of the soil is actually taking up any of that water. So over time, it just kind of dries out and dries out and dries out, and then your soil is actually completely unable to take up any water. So drip trays are really great. You just pour the water into the tray itself, and then it actually wicks up like a wick, and it moistens your soil from the bottom up. And you'll know to pour out the excess water when you can see kind of moisture forming on top of the soil, and the soil will become darker. But that's really important because it can kill your plants, unfortunately. And I also, if you're using a liquid fertilizer, it's the best way to completely saturate that soil in fertilizer as well. Heat mats. This is something I'm also experimenting with this year. I've noticed that actually I had a lot better germination rates underneath the seedlings, specifically for my onions. The seedlings that were underneath, I only have like a mini heat mat, but the ones that were underneath that one, I've noticed those pots were a lot fuller with seedlings. So they can help, especially if you're doing it by a window. A lot of times you can get like draft in, and it kind of keeps it really cold, so it can up that germination rate. So you'll get more seeds, little plants. Soil types, they're really, really important. There's so many out there that you'll notice. We have maybe 5 different brands, but they're all pretty much the same. They just kind of change the ratios. So a lot of time that ratio is important because sometimes if your house is warmer, you'll want something that's a little more like peat or soil heavy, and if your house is colder, you're gonna want something that's a little more perlite heavy, because that perlite, it's a naturally forming, it's like almost like a little foamy little piece, like granule that's in your soil. It just helps with that drainage in your soil, because if your house is colder, then not as much as that water is going to be evaporating or being used by the plants. So it's a lot more important to have that drainage in your pots, or else you're going to get root rot. But some other common additives are vermiculite and compost. I personally add a little bit of compost or worm castings into my soil. That way I don't have to start fertilizing with heavy-duty fertilizers as early on. I also really, really like to do more like organic. So I do a lot of like fish waste compost, or fish waste. I like to do compost, worm castings, things like that before I kind of move on to heavier fertilizers, just because it's really easy to burn your early seedlings. You'll notice that their leaves will kind of turn brown and turn all crispy, and it's because they got burned by those fertilizers. So I try to hold off on those as long as I can, just because they're so sensitive when they're little like that. All right, yeah.
Thanks. So some soils you can use that perhaps has perlite or something in it already?
Yep, most of them do. The Happy Frog is a little more peat heavy. There's another one, I believe it's called Light Warrior. That one is super perlite heavy. It's the same brand. So if you're looking for something that's pre-mixed, those two would be my go-to. There's also the Espoma one, which is really, really nice as well. It's Espoma, ESPOMA. We do have a little seed starting section in aisle 1 if you wanted to look at some of the products I was talking about. I don't have any of the Espoma one here. I have the Coast of Maine, but it's very, very similar to the Happy Frog as well.
Thanks.
Yeah. Pest prevention is personally my favorite. I really, really don't like the little insects in my house, so I like to do as much prevention and everything that I can. But some of the most common ones are spider mites and mealybugs. They are tiny, tiny little bugs. They are sap suckers. So you'll notice if you look underneath leaves, they'll have little tiny pinpricks almost where they've been kind of sucking that sap out of the plant and damaging those leaves. And you'll notice that the leaves will start to curl in on themselves because they're losing some of that nutrients and moisture from them. Spider mites, you can also notice them. They look like little webs on your plants. And it's really gross in my opinion because I don't like spiders. So having little micro spiders on my plants is really creepy. Mealybugs are another one. This is a minor infestation, this picture here, but they can completely take over a plant and almost make it look moldy. And they're another type of sap sucker, and they'll damage your plants. Whiteflies and fungus gnats are also another common one. These are the flying ones. I don't know if anyone here has house plants. Sometimes these guys, They like to
Fungus
hitch a
gnats.
ride.
Fungus gnats. My neighbor gave me a amaryllis. She
Yeah.
potted it up, and
Mm-hmm.
you gotta watch the soil.
Yeah.
Then she'd go and open the bag, and it's like,
I had someone return a bag not too long ago that was filled with them, but they actually lay their eggs in the
They're
soil,
annoying.
so sometimes you don't even notice that you have them, and then you'll be laying in bed at night, and if you're on your phone or on your Kindle or something, they can actually, I've had them fly up into my nose before. Yep.
Yeah.
They are terrible, and then we have them here in the spring just because so many plants are coming in from outdoors, but they are terrible, terrible little things. They are my arch nemesis in plant keeping.
did you try the sticky paper? That's the one that I found
Yep.
works the best.
Yeah.
I've done a couple different
Kinda gross,
things.
but it's-
There's the sticky papers, and I actually use diatomaceous earth, which is in about 2 slides, so I'll go over in a second. But the sticky traps are really satisfying because it's almost like a fly trap, but they come in fun little shapes, and it's really satisfying because you can see exactly how many you've caught. But the insecticidal soap, I really like this one. It's the Bonide one. There's also one, I'm totally forgetting his name. It's a dude with cool sunglasses on the front. But this is one of my favorite pest solutions. This is one that I will always have in my cabinet for my houseplants and my seedlings. It's really great for things like aphids, the whiteflies, and the spider mites. And it works by suffocating them because it's a type of soap. So it clogs all their pores, and they just kind of, and then you rinse them off in a day, and then your plant will be all nice and clean, and you won't have them. And it also works really, really well for more of a preventative. So if you get some like nursery plants, or if you get house plants, I always spray them down when I first bring them in because a lot of those pests, they spread to your other plants so quickly. So I would like to do it even just as a preventative. Yeah.
Okay. So after you spray the soap, you wait a day or two, and then you gotta rinse it off.
I rinse it off just because sometimes it can leave a white cast, almost looks like hard water on your leaves. And then another thing that I totally forgot to mention before, you want to do it kind of in the early, like the later evening, because if you put it directly into the sun or back under your grow light, it can actually burn your leaves, because it kind of concentrates that light, and you'll get a little bit of burnage, unfortunately.
And,
But
and to rinse it off, you just spray it
yep,
with water?
I just spray it with my kitchen hose.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Diatomaceous earth is definitely a must-have as well. This one, it's so multifunctional. You don't actually have to use it just for plants. It has so many other uses in the home. It does come in pretty big bags, but you'll go through it pretty quickly, especially in the spring and summer. But this works, it's very, very absorbent, so it actually wicks the moisture from the insects, and it can actually shred their exoskeleton. So if you spread it on top of soil, those fungus gnats that are going to crawl through that soil, like their larvae and their eggs will get dehydrated, and the adults that crawl through, it shreds them. It's not as gruesome as it sounds, I swear, but this is one of my favorites. Once you water it, you don't even see the dusty layer on it anymore, and you can actually use it for things like fleas. You can use it for cockroaches and ants, which is really great. Sometimes if you go outside, you'll see little ant hills everywhere. Just put a hefty layer on top and your ants will go away, because when they go out to collect food, they're going to walk through it, and then the colony will slowly diminish over time. So it's also a really, really great deodorizer. I know some people don't like the smell of, well, some people do, of their seedlings or like the fertilizer. Some of them can be kind of stinky. So it's a really great deodorizer, and you can actually use it in things like cat litter boxes to help with the smell there too.
So it's pet safe then?
Yeah, it's on. There's 2 different kinds. There's the food grade one and the non-food grade one. Honestly, the non-food grade, it's pretty much the same thing. But we have it in a couple different sections. I would recommend the one in our chicken section because that one is food grade. But it comes in like a 5-pound bag up to like a 50-pound bag. So there's a lot of different quantities you can get it. But that's one of my favorites personally. Neem oil, this is really similar to that insecticidal soap that I was talking about earlier. This one's really great because you can change the quantities, and it's also a little stronger, and the smell of it can actually prevent some pests. What I personally use, I got a cute little spray bottle from Target, so it looks all cute in my cabinet. But you just do neem oil, water, and Castile soap. I use the peppermint one because the smell of it helps prevent pests. things like spiders as well. And you can change how much you need, which is great. You can make a really, really big batch, or you can make a really little batch depending on how much you think you're going to use, which is really great. But the thing about,
Can you store it or not?
the spray bottle, yes.
Yeah.
I've had my spray bottle for a couple months now. I go through it pretty quickly because I have a lot of house plants that I use it for. And it also is really great because if you use a microfiber cloth or a paper towel, you can actually wipe off the leaves and it makes them really, really shiny, which is nice. And it can help get rid of that dust layer, which will help with photosynthesizing as well. But this one's similar to the insecticidal soap. You just want to make sure that it doesn't go into the sun when it's still wet, because I accidentally did that with one of my houseplants, my monstera, and all of the leaves turned to a crispy mess. And isopropyl alcohol. This is something a lot of people are going to have in their cabinet anyway. I really, really like it for mealybugs. I find it very satisfying. You just take a Q-tip, get it wet with the alcohol, and you just swipe them off, and they'll actually turn brown, and that is them dying. So you can also put it in a little spray bottle, spray your plants down, or also works really well for things like the spider mites that I found. All right. And the exciting part, you have worked so hard to get all these plants, keep them alive, make sure they're happy, healthy in your house. We do have to bring them outside eventually, because it's what we've been working so hard for. So, how to transplant. One common mistake I see a lot of people make is they get really, really excited to bring them out, and it's still pretty cold outside, and that soil is actually going to be a little colder underneath that top layer. So you just kind of want to make sure it's between 50 and 65 degrees. Some things like peas and beans, you can actually do them when the soil becomes workable. So if you can get a shovel in it, you can plant it, which is pretty cool. But you want to make sure you turn off your heat mats. I like to turn mine off pretty much a week after germination, just because I don't want them to become dependent on all of that heat. And I don't want them to have as much shock in that week before, because you're bringing them outside, taking them off the heat, so it can help with the shock. But the classic, most of you probably already know this, you're going to want to dig your hole. You can add fertilizer underneath. I like the Espoma fertilizers. The Costa Maine ones are also really, really great. But you can just add a little bit of sprinkle underneath your plants. It just kind of gives them that little boost, because they're going from your very curated environment inside. You've been fertilizing them on a schedule most likely, and then all of a sudden they're just getting chucked outside. So if you put a little bit of fertilizer on them, it can give them a little boost to help them kind of adjust from the inside environment to the outside. And then you just cover up the little root ball, which is great. And then I like to do it in the morning on a day that I know is going to be overcast, because when they're going from inside with your grow light, nothing beats the sun. I know we've all gotten a terrible sunburn before. Our plants can get a sunburn if they're not used to it. So I like to do either a shade cloth or do it on a really, really overcast day. Yeah.
So what does hardening off mean?
Hardening off? Don't you worry. But hardening off is really, really important, because, again, that shock from going inside where they're pretty much babied and pampered all day to all of a sudden having winds and bugs and the sun and everything in the rain, it's really important to get them used to it at first. I do about a week-long process, but when you are first starting your plants, something really important is to kind of strengthen them. I was talking about leggy plants earlier, which is when they kind of grow tall and they just flop over, and they don't get a lot of leaves to them. But you can get a little fan. I have one from Five Below. It was $5. It's maybe about this big, and I have it blowing on my plants constantly, because it actually stimulates them to have more stem growth, which is really important for them to be able to support their vegetables later on. And if you don't feel like getting a fan, or if you don't have enough plugs, I know some older houses don't have many plugs, you can just take your fan or your hand across them a couple times a day, just to kind of help them strengthen and get them used to something kind of breezing by them. And when it's about 60 degrees outside, you can actually place them on the whole tray or in their little pots. Place them outside. You want to start in an area that's pretty shady, like underneath a tree, just because you don't want to burn them. And you only do it for like 2 or 3 hours a day. If you're going out, say, to lunch or something, put them out and then bring them back in when you come back or if you're doing housework, cleaning, that's when I like to do it, just something to set an amount of time in my brain, because I've totally left them outside before and forgotten they're out there, and also come back to some crispy plants before. And then the next day you just put them out a little closer to some more direct sun, and you just kind of increase it over the next couple of days, the amount of sun and the amount of time. And by the 7th day, really, they should be able to stay outside for the night as well. It doesn't take that long for them to become stronger and used to the outdoors, because they are outdoor plants. So should be pretty much good by the 7th day. And sometimes you can kind of look at them, and if you notice that they're not doing as well, they're getting kind of wilty, you can make it take a couple more days and just give them a little more time to adjust. It also kind of depends on the weather as well, in case it's like hot or cold or anything. And I wanted to put some troubleshooting tips in here as well of some things that might happen. I talked a little bit about it before, but hydrophobic soil, this is when the soil has been dry for so long, it's unable to take up moisture. A lot of time, like this picture, you can see it, it either goes around the edges of the pot and straight down, or you'll notice that the very, very, very top dusty layer will become wet, and if you actually take your finger and swipe it to the side, the underneath will be dry, and it'll almost create a little bubble of water with the powdery, dusty dirt on it. It is kind of fun to look at, but it's not good for the health of your plants. You can get a wetting agent. I use something called Soil Moist. They're almost like little, do you know what Orbeez are? Something that maybe our kids played with, or something we've gotten recently. It's just a little piece of gel that expands when it's wet, and then it kind of redistributes that moisture back into the soil, and it just gives it a little more time to kind of rehydrate that soil. Bottom watering is something that is really important, because again, it helps wick up that soil. It gives it a lot of time to absorb all of that moisture. And something I like to do if I know my soil is a little hydrophobic is I actually just put it into a big old Tupperware. I pour a bunch of water in it, and I put the lid on, and I shake it up and like work it with my hands, just to get as much moisture into as much of it as possible. And then I let it sit like that overnight, and then I'll use it the next day. So, just because a lot of the time, if you don't store your soil properly, it can become hydrophobic in the bag. Over and underwatering is really important. A lot of the time, if you underwater your roots, they will be fine at first, but over time, all of a sudden, introducing all of that moisture is going to make them rot. I have a little picture here that just shows the different root growths. So your roots should be pretty white. They should be pretty plump. I like to also use clear pots and things like these. 'Cause sometimes it can be really, really expensive to be buying new pots for every time you need to repot. You can use little fruit containers, because they already have drainage holes. You can see exactly what's happening underneath the soil, and you can see the level of moisture that's become. A lot of the time you'll want to water when about 25% of the soil has become dry. Or a good rule of thumb, if you're not using a clear pot, is if you stick your finger in the soil, right between these two knuckles, if you start feeling moisture right about there, then you'll know it's time to water them. Because you don't want that soil to completely dry out, because your leaves are going to wilt. Sometimes they don't bounce back from that. And overwatering, again, we talked about this a little bit previously, it can cause those roots to rot because they're not able to take up oxygen, and they actually become suffocated. So it's no fun when that happens. Powdery mildew. This is one, I struggled with it a lot last year, so I wanted to make sure I included it. It can happen when there's too much humidity, too much moisture around your seedlings. I like to use a little clip-on fan to kind of prevent it and just make sure that there's some air circulation, especially if you have a lot of pots that are really close to each other. It can create almost like a microenvironment in that little area that's really humid, and it's the perfect breeding ground for this type of mildew. You can use the little fan, and then if you already have it, it can be a little hard to get rid of. I like the copper fungicide. I found it's also from Bonide. It's one of my favorite brands. You just give it a little mist, similar to the neem oil and the insecticidal soap. You want to make sure that you don't put it right under the grow light again or right into the sun, because it can burn your leaves.
That's great stuff.
Yeah, I love that stuff.
I lived in the South, and that's the only thing that kept my garden alive. Was 'cause
Yeah.
There's so much fungus everywhere.
Those are cucumbers last year. terrible. They, like, the leaves looked white. They almost looked like little skeletons because we had so much of it. And then another one we covered previously. A lot of these things overlap, which you'll notice. So sometimes it won't even necessarily be one single thing that's causing an issue. It can be a couple different things. But we had talked previously about leggy seedlings. I did include a picture here because a lot of people don't know what that word might mean. It's not very telling by the name. You kind of have to know what it means. But it happens when there's not enough light coming to those seedlings. And they're just stretching, trying to find as much light as possible. So a lot of the time they'll actually travel. Something I like to do, things like tomatoes, actually, they can grow roots from their stems at any point in the stem. So one of my favorite hacks is if you dig a hole that's maybe twice as deep as your root ball, you can actually plant about that much of the stem, and I only leave about that much of the plant out of the soil. Because giving it all of that space to kind of anchor into the soil is going to give it the best possible shot to take up nutrients, water, and it'll be able to support a lot of the weight of those tomatoes, because I like big canning tomatoes, so I needed to have as much strength as possible.
You try just laying them down?
I have done that, yeah. You can also lay it down if you don't feel like digging a really deep hole, and it'll kind of travel along. You can also do it with pumpkins as well. If you bury right where each leaf connects is there's little spots where the roots will grow, so that gives your pumpkins the absolute amount of nutrients that they're going to need, and it can help them have more growth and support more pumpkins, which is a really good hack that I like. And then some nutrient deficiencies. This is something, my seedlings are only about 2 weeks old. I'm growing some plants that need a lot of nutrients. I'm already experiencing some nutrient deficiencies, so I've already had to start dosing. But Fox Farm is one of my absolute favorites. It's they've got a couple different ones for each different life cycle of your plant, life stage of your plant. They're really easy. I like to go a little lighter because it can be easy to add too much nutrients into your water when you water with it, and you'll burn your plants. But this is one of my favorites, and I talked before about worm castings and compost. You can actually do something called top dressing, where you just sprinkle it on top of your soil, and when you water it, it will go into your water, and it'll water the plant with those nutrients, so that way you don't have to make like a gross worm casting tea or like a little soup almost. That's one of my favorite hacks. It's called top dressing. And then these are just a little graph here, because a lot of the time your plant will tell you exactly what it needs just by looking at it. So I wanted to add a little graph in about nutrient deficiencies. The magnesium one is the one I was currently battling with, but I use a different brand of fertilizer, and it's pretty much good on its new growth, so I'm really about that. But I just wanted to make sure that there was a visual on some of those nutrient deficiencies, because it can look so different for each different thing. Yeah.
So which fertilizer did you switch to?
I'm using pH Advanced. I'm growing plants that need a specific type of pH, so it actually balances the pH of the water, because they aren't able to take out that nutrients if you just use like tap water or like rainwater. So it's something called pH Advanced. It's very expensive. And that was just the end of the little slideshow. I just wanted to open it up to questions, or even if anyone has any hacks or anything that they wanted to share. I know some people in here have gardened before, so I just wanted to open it up to that if anyone had anything.
I have a question. When you're starting your seeds and you said that you put the fluorescent lights or whatever kind of lights, where do you do that? It looked like quite a big area.
The picture that I had was pretty big. The great thing about that one was the LEDs. Was it like the purple lighting in the picture?
It looked like it was almost on the outside of a house or something. I don't know. Anyway,
Yeah.
It looked like a big, the fluorescent lights.
Yeah.
Really
The great thing
long.
about all of those is that most of them come in a whole bunch of different sizes, so you can kind of customize it to your space. I personally like to mount them on the underneath of a shelf. I use the Home Depot, just like PVC and plastic, because it has grids in it.
Yep.
So I just zip tied it straight to it, and I put my little plants underneath.
Cool.
So that's the great thing about those, because especially LEDs, they come in anywhere from this big. You can get them in little bulbs, and they also come in like huge little strips, which work really well. If you're
Do
working
you
on
have
it.
to get something that's designated for plants, or can you just get?
Typically you do. I have bought some grow lights accidentally that don't have the light spectrum. So I've gotten some really, really leggy seedlings before. But if you're, say,
Okay.
buying on Amazon, all of the grow lights we have here, we know are okay for plants in
Okay.
case you didn't want to, like, get into that. But they'll have a little graph on them that usually if it has that graph, it's safe to assume it's okay for plants.
Oh, okay.
Because a lot of times it's just for light purposes. They don't put that on there.
Right, okay.
You can use any type of fluorescent bulb.
Yeah, you can. Very similar to these guys, a lot of them are marketed specifically for plants. They'll have a little more light spectrum. The thing about these guys, though, is they can't support lights or plants as long because it doesn't have that full light spectrum. It's really great for starting your seedlings, but if I were to put a plant, say, right here and expect it to grow, since it has such a big distance between it, it's not going to be able to support that plant for very long.
You keep the fluorescent light on all the time.
Depends on the type of plant you're growing. Typically, it's safe between 8 to 10 hours. You can go up to 12 if you want to see a little more growth a little sooner as well. Yeah. But that's
a
why.
lot of them. The cheapest way is you buy the shop lights,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
right? And they have the chains. And you,
Yeah.
if you're
Yep.
doing them in your basement, like you can hang them in, and you keep moving them up and down depending on how big the plants are.
Okay, yeah.
We have those.
We have
Yeah.
a bunch of them at home that are sitting in the corner.
You know, like that's what I use. I use the shop lights because they're cheap, and you just buy the light bulbs.
Yep.
Because
Oh, okay.
you're gonna have to buy the light bulbs anyway. Probably
Oh,
a
right.
year and a half, year later, you're gonna have to buy light bulbs anyway.
Right.
So.
And a lot of the time, you can honestly find those fixtures on things like Craigslist or on Facebook Marketplace. Just because-
And Ocean
People
State's
don't
got them
get rid
like
of them.
Yep.
$8, you know.
But those work really, really well. I did those for my fish tank. I had a 75-gallon fish tank, and I used those fluorescent lights just because it's so much cheaper than buying like
Yeah.
targeted fish tank lights. And like you said, with the chains, it works amazing. I love doing the
Just
chains.
keep moving them up and down the
Yep.
way to
And chain is
Good to
super
know.
cheap. You get it at
my-
Home
yeah.
Depot.
The temperature range for starting seeds,
Mhm.
because I have a growing station and I have the mat. Some of them come up real quick, and then again, to get them so my basement gets cold.
Yeah.
All right, so I have a portable heater, but don't want to run that too long either. You
Yeah,
know?
that
So
can use a lot of energy.
what is the range of temperatures that I should be trying to keep?
I keep it a lot of different areas, I'll be honest. I really like the heat mats like you're using. Probably around 65 to 75. You can
Okay.
keep it pretty low because they do have to grow a lot of the time during those colder seasons. But as long as you kind of keep it a little more consistent and maybe not keep it like, say, 80 for the beginning of,
Yeah.
just try not to have like big swings.
The Grow Map's got a temperature gauge on it.
Yeah, oh, that's great.
I got a zillion thermometers.
I'll be honest, I don't even keep track of my temperature. I just kind of put my hand underneath the
So I'm a
pot.
chef. I got instant read thermometers. I just use
Oh.
them instant read thermometers.
Hmm. I used to have one of those, but I broke it and I never bought a new one.
$9. You can get for
You know what else I could get for $9? I gotta buy new packets of seeds.
cheap.
You don't want the $400 tomato.
Yeah.
Right, you don't know. You know,
You're telling my son-in-law that, I said, you know.
I just built new raised beds and I'm already, I think, $1,000 into what I could buy at the grocery store for
Yeah.
cheap. But you know exactly what's gone into the plants, you know exactly what's been around them, and you know that they're fresh and they haven't been sprayed with
I
anything.
think a lot of people think it's such a great idea to grow their own plants,
Mhm.
and then it's like,
It gets
you gotta
expensive.
take care of them.
Mhm.
Right.
You say, oh, you got a green thumb. No, I take care of them.
Mhm. Yeah, that's something that I definitely think a lot of more people need to talk about.
Yeah, I think
It's-
they do,
People think that
It's been
having,
much better since I retired.
yeah, got more time. But I think a lot of people think that you're born with a green thumb. You're really not. It's just making sure that you know, kind of doing your research into what you're doing and being observant is really the majority of it. A lot of people just think, oh, I've planted it, I'll water it. But you have to be observant and kind of like see what your seeds are telling you or what your seedlings are telling you, because that's honestly half the battle. Because you're not gonna know until it's too late if you don't watch and kind of look at them every day. Definitely. Yeah.
Regarding container gardening
Uh-huh.
with the containers,
Yeah.
you know, how often should you replenish that soil?
I'll be honest, I amend it every year. The great thing, I use 5-gallon buckets, so it's really
Yeah.
not that much soil.
Yeah.
But I just dump it out in my wheelbarrow, and I add some more like worm castings. I have chickens, so I actually add their coop shavings
Right.
and like whatever I rake up from their yard, and I let it kind of sit over the winter, and I just add it right back into the bucket.
Okay.
And honestly-
And for worm castings,
Yeah.
you buy.
Yep, it comes in little bags. And if you have like a compost pile, a lot of time if you scrape up that first layer,
Mhm.
what's underneath will be a lot of that compost and the worm castings. Yeah, but worm castings are one of my favorites because they're high in nitrogen, so it's gonna really, really help with that root and plant growth. All right. Yeah.
I'm curious. So I've been last year was my first year with my garden.
Mhm.
I inherited a very beautiful farmland, and I neglected it for like 3 years and
That's
started
okay.
it last year. And I'm trying to do it on a budget.
Mhm.
So one thing I was experimenting with last year was coffee grounds
Yeah.
as fertilizer,
Mhm.
to add the nitrogen fertilizer and whatnot. Do you have a suggestion of like a mixture to use that? Because I threw it in my beds and I
Mhm.
feel like it was a little much.
I don't have a specific amount. I just kind of do like a light sprinkle. There's other things you can use, like you can take banana peels, put them in water, and let them sit for like a week or so, and you can add that. You can also add things like eggshells, but the only thing about that is it actually takes a little longer than you would think for it to break down into your soil, into something that your plants can actually use. So that'd be really, really great if you added it now, so that way by next year, it'll kind of amend your soil a little bit more. So a lot of things are really great if you do them ahead of time, because that helps. You want to make sure your garden can thrive in future years as well. So yeah, you can do banana peels. I have these raised beds. They're maybe, I don't know, 30 inches tall. I made sure they were really, really deep for optimal root growth. But I just got horse manure, cow manure, and topsoil mix that I filled them with. So, yeah.
I had a friend, and we tried it too, that did something called lasagna gardening. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
Instead of soil, use like newspaper and, and it's.
I have.
it's-
That's what.
yeah.
Mhm. We actually bought this house this last year. That's why we built all these beautiful new raised beds. So they had some very ugly ornamental shrubs that we threw into our raised beds, because since they're so tall, you can take, like you said, newspaper. A lot of people do a layer of cardboard underneath to help with weeds. I did those
Yeah.
terrible shrubs, ornamental grass,
Yeah.
sticks, leaves.
The grass clippings in the
Oh,
bag,
grass, yeah.
as long as it's not fertilized,
Mhm.
Yeah.
you know.
We would go on raids.
Around
My
the
neighbor would say,
neighborhood.
"Come on, Sue, we're gonna go around the neighborhood," and we would go and steal people's bags.
Well,
Like,
there you
maybe not
go.
that they cared, you know.
No.
It's like, fine, steal away.
But
Yeah.
Just
And
gotta be
then-
careful what they're putting on the lawn though.
Yeah.
Well, that's the
Yeah.
thing. We
Yeah.
kept an eye
Roundup.
on the neighbors that,
Yeah.
you know, were fertilizing, and we wouldn't touch that.
The poison truck comes down our street all the time.
yeah,
Yeah.
we saw them not so, our neighbors
Tells us,
across
"Get
the
away from my
lawn.
house. Don't even come near my yard.
Mhm. It just don't get me started about those
Yeah.
people. But if you're doing like you were saying, if you're doing more on a budget, when I was talking about the horse manure and the cow manure, I actually got some of it for free, and there's a place maybe a quarter mile down the road from me. It was $20 for an entire truckload. So that's something really great. You can also, there's a company called Chip Drop. If you add, say, into your raised beds on the bottom, or if you mulch the top, I think it's $50 for an entire dump truck load of chips. So it's great, I'll be honest. So if you have raised beds and you want to add some on top, or you can do walkways with it, or even just adding it to your compost pile, there's a lot of cheap ways that you can kind of bulk up.
Some cities in town give compost away.
Yeah, definitely.
I get Holyoke gives away tons of it.
And if anyone has like a friend with rabbits, you can actually add their droppings directly to your raised beds, because since they're herbivores, the nutrients from their droppings isn't going to burn your plants. It's actually ready to be used by your plants immediately. So you can actually dig a little hole next to your plants, drop some little rabbit droppings in there, and your plants can use it immediately, which is really great. Yeah.
How about goose poop?
Goose poop.
I wouldn't.
That
use
one
it
would be a
with
little.
bird
I'd be a
food.
little more careful with that one.
Yeah.
Since they're not fully herbivores. Sometimes it can burn your plants, but you
Yeah.
can add it in the fall, so that way it has a little more time to compost. You can do that.
Waterfowl is where the bird flu is too.
That's
Yeah.
what I wouldn't touch
And
those with a
raptors.
10-foot pole
Yeah.
right now. Mm-mm.
But I personally use the chicken shavings,
Yeah.
which I found has worked really, really well. You just don't want to add it to this year. You want to make sure you have some time.
Do your chickens, I mean, you guys, you got more of a farm or is it, you got a lot of property?
I used to. Well, I still. I live on an acre,
Yeah.
so we really like to take as much, like, use our space as
Yeah.
much as possible. I used to have 10 chickens, and we had this beautiful coop and everything, but we could trying to follow more of like the homesteading lifestyle of
Yeah.
like canning sourdough, chickens, gardening. One of my goals is to be really self-sufficient because honestly these days you don't really know with something, especially egg prices especially. I just like to kind of have that reassurance that if anything were to happen, even a natural disaster, that everything's going to be okay in my house.
Even that, I live in Springfield and technically it's against the law to
Oh,
have
really?
chickens in your yard.
Oh, really?
When we were
In the
moving,
city.
we made sure that we moved to a right to farm town.
Yeah.
So that was pretty much the only thing, the only criteria.
I have a neighbor that has them. I
Mhm.
saw them back there and I says, are those chickens? He goes, who wants to know?
Yeah. My neighbor has
The lady
Oh,
that
yeah.
wants free eggs.
Do they tend to smell a lot?
Chickens,
Yeah.
it depends how much you rake. If you use diatomaceous earth, a lot of people put that down. It helps with mites and it helps with deodorization.
Yeah.
As long as you keep it clean, it's not too bad. But it's a lot of keeping it clean. A lot of people do quail actually in places that they can't have chickens because they're significantly quieter than chickens and they don't take up as much room. So it's a really great low-key way of getting those eggs and having all of the waste.
Yeah, they have
They're
little-
really good at that.
I used to have them.
I used to raise them too. I
Where do
raised
you get
pheasants for a while
quails?
too, so.
I got them. So I'm actually from Vermont.
Oh.
So we have this place called Runnings. It's very, very, very similar to Tractor Supply, but my brother's best friends with their lawn and garden manager. So he special ordered me in some quail. So that's where I got my quail. But a lot of time I always see them on Craigslist. I bet if you went to Tractor Supply, you could ask and they might be able to order some in. The only thing is you might have to get a higher quantity because they have a minimum amount that they have to get.
You gotta watch out for the hawks.
Yep, that's why I have not.
You've got hogs.
That's why I said I had
Watch
10
out for the
chickens.
hawks.
Oh no.
Yeah, I actually hit a hawk with a broom the other day
Yeah.
because when my chicken's been down.
Oh.
I got one in
So
my backyard all the time.
yeah, I haven't named him yet, but
Have
Right.
you got
Won't
one
be a
of
good
the small,
name.
one of the small ones?
No, I got red tails and the small
Well,
ones.
the
Yeah.
big ones, the small one is one that's in the, it's eating all my songbirds.
aw.
Yeah, I know. I have bird feeders, and I got one that feeds out of my bird feeders.
Yeah.
Wow.
It sits right on top of the feeder sometimes.
Yeah, he sits in the tree right
Yeah,
and
wait for
watches
it.
it, or on top of the telephone
Usually,
pole and down
only,
the street
I won't
watches.
eat the icky little birds.
Yeah,
Once the cardinals or, the nice birds.
the good ones, the
Well,
pretty
yeah.
Good
ones.
tasting
Well,
ones.
I still have some pigeons that come in from like somebody else's. There's some places that come in every once in a while, and they'll take the pigeons out. They're crazy.
Aw, that's so fun.
I'm sitting in the house the other day
mentioned
watching
canning.
television, and
Yeah.
the sun went dark.
Would you ever consider
That
teaching a
red
class?
tail
I've
was
always
probably
wanted
We
Yeah.
actually did
3-foot
do a
wingspan that
canning
came through
class.
the-
Yeah,
bird
it happened a couple
It
months
just
ago.
blocked the sun out.
She was actually talking.
For a second.
She might do another one, but I know her schedule is a little tight right now. So
I think
definitely
Yeah,
keep an
love
eye out for
I
that.
think
Maybe
there's
I work on my house.
I think it might be Hubbard Library. They're doing some canning classes.
No kidding.
Coming up. I always just look at all the
Yeah, right up the
library
road
sites
from
because
me.
they
One of
have
my
a
friends
really
lives
good
back there.
No kidding.
Oh, good to
Yeah,
know.
so they're doing
Yeah.
a whole course, I think, like a few weeks long, where they talk about the process.
Oh,
but
I'll
yeah,
check into that.
it's Hubbard, but I'll, that's sort of
Thank you.
yeah, no problem. I like library. tea over
I
here.
love library.
Oh, something I wanted to discuss that I revised a lot of the slideshow, so it actually has more information than it did the first round, but I didn't have time to add all of the information I wanted to. So I briefly touched on these little containers here. something, if you are very limited on space, it's called seed tape. So do you know sometimes when you get like that foamy packaging on packages, it's almost like corrugated looking almost. You can actually take soil on that. It's great for things like carrots, greens, and onions. You just spread your soil and your seeds on it and roll it up and put some rubber bands on it. So you can get maybe 100 plants on a little bunch about this big. So that's really, really great for if you are limited to space. It also makes it really easy to transplant because you just unroll it and pretty much you could do it with something compostable and just stick the whole thing in your soil. Or you just pick off the little pieces because you don't have to deal with all the roots being tangled together. So you can just plant them all up. We do have it's something new that Anne got this year. They actually, just like our little seed packets, it's already rolled seed tape. So I'm definitely going to try it this year, but it's definitely something to look at because it's really great.
You roll it into a bunch?
Yep, so you just roll it all up.
Because I've had seed tape, but I've never, just for regular planting I've used, but not with rolling it up.
Yeah, so there's two different ways. The seed tape is the little smaller one, but I know Anne was doing it this year, but I was going to experiment with it. It's kind of almost looks like a cinnamon roll, if that makes sense. Yeah. It's kind of like a pot that since everything isn't touching each other as much, it's a great way to get a lot of different varieties in the same little bunch as well if you're planting like 3 different types of onions. Because if you unroll it, each segment is the type of onion or carrot or greens that you're going to use.
How does the green part not get squished when it's rolled up?
It grows up through it.
Oh,
So
okay.
since so if you imagine like a cinnamon roll, how you can still see the filling, like the swirl on it, imagine that's the dirt and like the dough
So you
is...
put the dirt down, then you roll it up.
Yep, exactly.
Oh, okay,
And then you
got
kind
it.
of turn it on its side and it stands up with the rubber
Do
bands.
you water it top or bottom?
I would do bottom.
And where do you don't carry that here, do you?
We have the little seed tape rolls, but it's a really good DIY option if you were interested. But it's definitely something cool to look up. I wanted to look up a picture and put it in the slideshow because it's a lot easier to have a visual of things like that, but did not have time to do that, unfortunately.
And how did egg cartons? I thought,
Yeah.
using this.
No, that's
for
great.
start-
I would
for
just
starters?
poke a little hole. You can just use a
With a
little
little-
knife
Yeah.
because sometimes they get a little soggy sometimes.
Okay.
But no, that works really, really great because you can just cut them apart.
Yeah.
And then, like I said, with the compostable pots, you just kind of split it open a little bit
Right.
and just put the whole thing in there. Works
Right.
really, really well.
So now would these be compostable?
Yeah, those are compostable.
Yeah.
Paper.
Paper.
You can also use the plastic ones as well if you wanted to reuse them. Those
Okay.
work really well too.
Okay. Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Just tell her not to take my golf balls out.
No.
Yeah, that's important.
Golf balls are expensive.
We
these
live right
days.
across the street from Veterans Golf Course.
Mm-hmm.
We get a half dozen every time we throw. Your banana peels and eggshells, so like, where do you throw them for compost?
You can either bury them a little bit in the soil. A lot of time with the banana peels, you pour the liquid on. I use like a pump sprayer, and so I use that to kind of amend the soil, and it kind of goes through the soil as it rains.
So you kind of marinate it in water.
Yeah,
then.
exactly. The water will turn kind of like almost like a tea color. It won't turn like yellow or anything.
So when we have our eggshells and banana peels, I couldn't just like throw them in a joint compound bucket and throw it outside. Just keep putting that for the winter, and then
I think you should be able to. Basically, just be like a
It's
little
gonna
compost
freeze.
pile.
yeah.
Yeah.
Should I add any dirt to it or something?
You can. That's entirely your decision. You could do, like you were saying with the lasagna, you can use both, so it's called green and brown compost. If you add things like newspaper or cardboard to it, it can help kind of balance out the nutrients and help it compost a little faster because it gives it a little more something to kind of break down.
Right.
Yeah, and I think they call that a tea, don't they? Like making a.
I've done
fertilizer
manure tea
tea.
before, which I did that on my tomatoes last year, and that worked really well. But a lot of people complain that it's stinky because it is manure, and it's kind of gross to have a bucket of manure and water kind of sitting. I had it underneath my deck,
Yeah.
so
I grew mushrooms once, and my
Yeah.
family told me that's the last time you do it.
yeah.
Mushrooms stink.
Gotta cook the manure. You gotta cook the
Sure.
worms and stuff out of the manure, so you gotta put it in the oven.
Oh, gross. I've seen
Gotta
a
get it to over
couple.
100, gotta get it up to over 140 degrees.
Yeah, that's another thing. If you think that your soil might have fungus gnats, if you get just like a little bag like this guy, like you said, just bake it and it'll get those little eggs out and kill them. You can also freeze it as well. This is
The
a
other
really
thing with
great time
eggshells,
of
I've
year.
seen people put them in food processors and just grind them down to nothing and just put them in the soil, just like perlite.
Oh.
It gives it a little bit of
Yeah.
aeration too at the same time. It lightens the soil up.
Yeah, I haven't seen that before, but that sounds pretty cool.
It is, put them in the food processor. I would clean them a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, clean the food processor, right? But I
Have
have
a
an old
specific
food
one.
processor I use for
good
that stuff
eggs.
like that. Especially some of the compost is a little tough. You know, it's especially the stuff that they just run through a grinder. So I have an old food processor that I use. Just put the thing in, grind it for a little while longer.
I'm using mine for the salsa for tomorrow's.
Well, I said that
after you make the
I
salsa.
have three. I'm a chef. I have more equipment than I need. You know, so I have an old food processor, and I have my commercial food processor, and I got my commercial mixer, and I got my little bit.
You're talking to a lady that has like 8 crock pots, so.
Yeah.
I found my people.
My wife says, "Where did you get that?" But they don't want to know.
I've used a mortar and pestle, but I mean, if
She's
you
also
don't,
told me I can't have any more knives.
you can never have too many knives,
Oh yeah,
in
well,
my opinion.
you don't know my knives.
I may have missed in the beginning, but
Yeah.
just a quick question about you. Have you done? I forget the term for it, but it's like when you put the seedlings in milk jugs outside.
Yeah, I actually got a lady that's been talking about that. She's been on my TikTok recently. She's actually, so I keep mentioning Anne. She's the lawn and garden manager here. She does her cut flowers, actually. I have not done it yet. We've been talking about it a lot the past few days because we both want to try it. But yeah, it's, you pretty much take your milk cartons and then she does her cut flowers. That way she can start selling them earlier. But she just throws them outside, even in the snow. You just have to make sure it's really cold hardy things. Like, I believe she did snapdragons and hollyhocks were the two that are coming off the top of my head. But that's definitely something that I'm going to try this year. Because it sounds really cool.
Inside. I have like 0 space inside.
Oh, no.
But I have a lot of seeds this year that I want to try and plant. So I'm trying to figure out how to do it where it's not. Also, second part of my question. Another idea I was thinking, and I'm new to this, but greenhouse. If you're doing greenhouse, kind of, can you baby them? Not when you're doing that like hardy phase. Can you kind of just leave them in the greenhouse overnight if they're really well protected?
I would, because it's really at the frost warning, making sure that they don't frost. And then if you get like the cheap ones, you see them sometimes at like Ocean State. Those are really, really light because it's mostly PVC and like that thin plastic material. You can move it to somewhere. I would just make sure to put it somewhere shaded because they'll stay pretty warm over the night. But you can also take something like a warm water bottle or something and put it in there. That way it kind of radiates heat over a certain period of time if you're worried about it. Yeah.
In terms of soil, in terms of talking about pasteurization for mushrooms and that sort of thing, I guess I'm confused about organic gardening. You want to have the microbes in the soil, and then you're going to go and kill the microbes. I'm confused.
Well, I do organic gardening outside, but when they're inside, honestly, I found it's a little better to have it more sterilized because you can get like fungus on the top of your soil that gets kind of fuzzy. It gets like a white powdery substance. So I find it can help with that. And then just starting up, it can help with things like fungus gnats. Sometimes you'll get like a really wet bag of soil. So I would bake that, but you don't necessarily have to.
So pasteurizing, especially because I'm thinking of an indoor cellar.
Yeah, you want to use as close to clean soil as possible for inside.
Self-pasteurized.
And then I outside I just use, I use the same soil and I add compost to it every year.
Yep.
I add the same soil and I add compost to it every year.
So even if we bought that, we would want to sterilize it?
No.
You don't necessarily have to.
No,
These
that's
guys
already
here
done.
are pretty dry, and since it's the peat, it doesn't have as much nutrients in it, so it's not going to have anything like compost in it
okay.
that's going to kind of have that like
Oh,
microbe that he was
okay.
talking about.
Okay.
It's pretty sterile already. I haven't had any issues with fungus gnats and the Happy Frog so far. I bought a couple
Okay.
bags of that one specifically. I've noticed Miracle Grow is the worst one for fungus gnats because usually those bags are a little wetter and it's a
Mhm.
lower quality soil.
Mhm.
So that's what I've had a lot of issues with.
And so for, if we wanna start our seeds, I'm sorry if you already said this,
That's okay.
we get the seed starter or that, or?
It all depends on your preference. The Happy Frog, it is labeled as a potting soil, but it works really, really well. Usually I'll add a little bit of more perlite to it. You can buy perlite just in a bag. But I also add something called leca to it as well, which helps with drainage. It helps from the soil compacting. They're almost like cocoa puffs.
Oh, okay.
But they're clay. So they're
Okay.
like expanded little clay balls that I add to
Okay.
the soil to help.
Do they have it
What
here?
are they called?
We do. We have it in leca, Leca. It's mostly used in hydroponic gardening, but if you add it to I do a lot of house plants, as you've probably noticed I mention it a lot. You can use that. It's basically just like an alternative growing media, especially if you hate things like fungus gnats. You just plant your plant just like you would if it was in soil. People do 2 different methods. I personally don't use a catch pot. I just put it straight into a completely closed container. I get they're from the dollar store. It's technically a vase, but it's just like a straight up and down glass jar almost. And you just add your fertilizer straight to the water that's in that, and it wicks up through that leca, which I'm going to experiment with it this year for things like tomatoes, to try to grow them hydroponically, or maybe some herbs, or like maybe some lettuce I've seen people do, because you can get some really hefty roots with
Yeah, lettuce
lettuce.
works well, but I don't know about tomatoes.
I would try it, but it doesn't mean it's going to work. I'm big on experimenting. Yeah.
Did you hear about putting old coffee grounds in the soil for like more nitrogen?
Yeah, they
Yeah.
were just talking
Yeah.
about that.
You can definitely do that. Anything that's going to
Sorry, I was
compost
writing.
into the soil.
If you use real wood in a fire, you
Yeah.
know, and that works. Also,
Mm-hmm.
you know, just the wood ash has a lot of nutrients
Yeah.
in it
Awesome.
and stuff, and so I have again, you don't have one in your backyard. I have a wood-fired oven in my backyard.
You do have everything.
Well, I guess.
How about pellet stove ashes?
I don't know what's in the pellet, what is actually in the pellets, all right? So if there's any chemicals in there, I would kind of stay away from that, but if I burn real, cherry apple and hickory and sometimes pecan and some other fruit woods. But it does a real nice thing, and even around your azaleas and around your rhododendrons and all that kind of stuff, they love the wood ash.
I've heard it's very similar to diatomaceous earth as well.
Yeah.
And I've seen a lot of people with like wood stoves that actually take a wet rag, touch it to that ash, and you can use it for cleaning glass surfaces because it's a mild abrasive.
Yeah.
So if you have like an oven door that's really finicky with getting like, how it turns brown and it gets the splatters on it, it can help get that layer off,
Nice.
which works really
Glass
well.
top stove.
Yeah, but it's also a really great pest preventative if you
Yeah.
sprinkle it on the soil.
Side note, coffee ground tip, if you
Yeah.
want free grounds, Starbucks has a program.
I've heard
Yeah.
that.
I just pick it up from there and they do it in like 5-pound bags. You can do it as often as you want.
Awesome.
I do it at smaller coffee shops too, but I don't do the flavored coffee.
Right,
I'm
right.
nervous about those artificial
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
I don't include that, but Starbucks does. You can call them anytime and they will give
Great.
you as many coffee grounds as you
Oh,
want.
That's
that's
great.
cool.
Yeah.
I've heard people using it for chicken bedding, which sounds weird in their coop because it smells good, it helps deodorize, and it honestly works kind of similar to cat litter where you can like sift out the little chunks, and it's pretty cool that I've seen people do. Yeah.
Interesting. Can I ask another question?
Of course, that's what I'm here for.
When you're planning out your seedlings,
Mhm.
so to avoid getting an overabundance of too many plants,
Mhm.
let's say you want 10 tomato plants, how many seedlings would you suggest starting with?
I'll be honest, I would start with the amount that I want,
Okay.
and then I just kind of look at the germination rate, and even if there's a couple days in between or like a week or two, I haven't found that it has much of a difference, because the size of the seedlings is really only going to be a couple inches. And you can also just wholesome if you have too many. Some of them are not going to thrive as well. So if you have too many, just chop it and put it in your compost pile. You're only wasting a couple seeds. But I found that works really
You're always gonna
well.
have seeds left over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, so just, you know, I do the same thing. I plant probably twice as many seeds as I'm gonna want for plants. And if they're real nice, then, you know, somebody down the street might,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
you know, I give it to them, but, you know, just, but,
I have a
because
table
I'm
outside
gonna,
for that.
Yeah.
I just give away all the stuff.
but I mean,
I'm like,
tomatoes, I don't give away too many tomatoes, because I probably make, you know, maybe 4 gallons of sauce every year and freeze them,
Mhm.
so.
Yeah. But another important thing is definitely plan out your garden too, to know how much space you have. I've totally overplanted before, and I, like you said, give them away, or
Yeah.
I gave them to my chickens. I'll be honest, I just kind of turn the pots
Salsa.
over, give it to them.
Yeah.
According to my wife, I can't plant enough flowers. 'Cause
Oh,
she,
yeah.
You know, I don't know what she's gonna do with them all, but she can plant flowers. I gotta
We're doing
prove
a
it.
cut flower garden this year.
Yeah,
That's
if
going
I
to be
do-
something
That's what I
entirely
do.
new.
Probably 3 beds of cut flowers.
Wow.
Yeah, just because she's nuts about flowers. She's
Oh.
gotta have flowers in the bathroom. She's gotta have flowers in the kitchen. Gotta have flowers here.
Well, lucky for her, we're getting some flowers here soon. So I know Anne's placing the order soon. So
Yeah.
she'll have to
The
swing
one
by.
the one I planted 2 years ago, I got seeds someplace, and they were the Mexican sunflowers. And I can't
Oh.
remember the name of it. They were gorgeous. They were orange.
Mm-hmm. Ooh.
They were orange, and I'm trying to remember the name of it. I couldn't. I went to a show, and somebody handed it to me and said, "You grow sunflowers?" Yeah, I grow all kinds of sunflowers. I said, "Well, try these." Yeah, now I can't find it.
Oh, no.
They didn't grow like sunflowers high. They probably were only maybe 3 feet.
I've seen something similar. Like orange. Were they like orange and like kind of different shades of brown as well?
No, they were just
Just
they were
orange.
with
Ah.
orange and yellow.
I've seen ones that are like orange and brown before. Those typically
My
come in
wife
like
said,
mixed
gotta
sunflower.
get those. I don't know what I forgot what they were.
I did the mammoth ones last year, and the Japanese beetles. They were terrible last year. They
Yeah.
just completely mowed them. It was terrible.
You know, hang the pheromones on it.
Yeah, I need to get
trap
those.
a lot of Japanese beetles.
Yeah, and the great thing is if you have chickens or someone who has chickens, just throw the whole bag in the trash, because since it's a pheromone, not a chemical that's gonna coat them,
Yeah.
throw them in the freezer, and I swear any of your chicken friends or duck friends is gonna love you, because that is free treats.
Yeah.
Well, I had a mosquito trap for a while, and I have a friend who raised trout.
Ooh,
Well, he loved those. I just take the mosquitoes and throw them on
yeah.
his trout pond.
There's like the smallest hole in my fence, and going to my neighbor's yard, and they have ducks. Ducks or chickens, I don't know what they are. They say they're ducks, but I pass my hornworms through them.
Oh.
I save up all my hornworms and I pass them all the tomato hornworms,
Aww.
and they love it. And it's like every time they freak out. I'm like,
Aw.
I asked my neighbors first. So.
Yeah. A lot of those hornworms, they're so, I don't know, they creep me out. I keep them for reptiles, but they're gross. I don't like them.
Someone said that you can sell them to like
Yeah.
pet.
A lot of places will raise them. You have to be careful with the ones that are found outside,
Yeah.
because tomato plants, they're a part of the nightshade family. So if you feed them to like a reptile, it might be a little toxic to them. But if you have like a chicken or a duck, they're gonna be completely fine. It's just the size difference between, say, a lizard that's this big and your 4-pound chicken. A little different.
Very fair.
But no, those are great, like, animal snacks for sure. And they're terrible to your plants, so.
The whole plant down in like overnight.
Yeah. A lot of those, like, the Japanese beetles, a lot of the time people don't even realize that they have, like, that's what the problem is. That was one of the biggest conversations I had this past spring and summer, because they're nocturnal. So they pretty much just emerge, eat everything, and disappear before you even knew anything was happening. So a lot of people think they were like caterpillars, or even just like something wrong with the plant, but it was these little guys. Yeah.
I tried to grow kale for the first time last year, and just immediately they would be decimated by
Japanese beetles.
Japanese beetles.
Yeah.
Japanese beetles.
And,
Yeah.
And the cabbage beetles,
Yeah.
the brown ones.
I actually put diatomaceous earth around the roots of my plants,
Yeah.
so that I just literally cake it on top, like right next to the stem, And I did find that helped a lot. It's just, I couldn't maintain it with all the watering and everything.
Yeah.
It was really hard to keep up with, but it did work temporarily, and doing the aluminum foil on the roots, that worked a little bit to get some of them off,
But the pheromone traps work really well.
Yeah, they do.
Something you have to make sure. A lot of people actually set them up too close to their plants, which is going to attract them towards your garden. You actually want to do it like 20 feet away from, like, you want to lure them away from your garden, because you want them to go that way and go in the bag. You don't want them to be attracted to your garden and munch on things on the way to the bag.
Hang
That is no
out on the
fun.
fence on the other neighbor's garden.
Yeah, exactly. If you have someone you don't like, throw little bait traps their way. Of course, yeah.
I know you've
All right.
been standing, I'm very thankful.
Yeah.
I can't grow my cilantro for my salsa. It's like,
You're trying to do
I
that?
go to deliver something.
I'm having trouble.
You could try, we have something, they're like little hydroponic plugs. They almost look like little foam plugs.
Yeah.
Anne she does all of her herbs in those. So you pretty much just keep it in a little cup of water, and it wicks through that little plug.
Oh.
But things like that work really, really, really well for those like herb gardens.
Oh,
It's all on up
It
front.
feels weird to me.
But try doing like a little more moisture, or maybe a different method, because a lot of those herbs actually love water.
Yeah.
So maybe
Yeah,
try
Sue
that.
was telling me they need a lot, but not too much.
Yeah, you know, cause they usually turn yellow, and I'm like, well, you're either overwatering them or underwatering
Yeah.
them.
So if you do it like hydroponically, then since it's such a sanitary environment, a lot of the time you won't have as much rot, even though there's more moisture
Oh,
involved.
cool.
So it's pretty cool.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This has been awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you
Do
so
Do you guys
much.
do more workshops, like specifically gardening workshops?
Do we have any more planned?
We'll have a whole lot more in
Yeah.
the next
Yay.
2 weeks and months.
Yay.
Yeah.
Well, you're gonna do
All
a
of
plant
our-
swap, right?
Yeah, on,
Oh, yeah, that's this
on
coming
next
weekend.
Saturday, yeah, we're doing a plant swap, and then we have some
Yeah.
more kids events the week after that. So yeah, go check out our website.
Oh,
We'll have
yeah.
there's a whole lot on there. So and
The
more
board
to
up front
come,
also
so.
usually
And if
has
we
a
have,
post
if
on
we
it.
have, we would like to see a workshop, maybe I was asking about canning, which you already
Oh, we
have.
probably will do another camp
But-
one in the next few months. Yeah.
Okay, so do we just go on your Facebook and say,
Yeah,
hey, guys?
Yeah, just Facebook or our website, and it'll be on there. It'll be published, and those workshops are at no cost. So some of the classes we're doing like more extensively building birdhouses, like those have a price, but these are always free. So.
Oh, cool, this is
Yeah,
awesome.
This is my favorite
This is
picture there at
awesome.
Oh, my
the
goodness.
dog wash.
That's an old one.
That's funny.
I think it's a timeline. It goes from the oldest to the
Yeah.
newest.
Oh, okay.
Like these are receipts that I tracked down at the library. And
Really?
Oh, no
really?
kidding.
From
Yeah,
1919.
that's awesome.
So.
Wow, this is awesome.
Cool.
Thank